Let me start with something I see over and over again sitting across from founders and CEOs. Same IQ, same market, same capital, and same experience. Completely different outcomes when pressure hits. One leader gets sharper, simpler, almost unnervingly clear. The other starts tightening everything. Conversations shrink, decisions speed up but lose depth. The room gets quieter, but not because things are calm, but because people stop telling the truth. And from the outside, both still look like strong CEOs. But under the surface, something very different is happening. Pressure is reorganizing them, not their company, them. And that distinction is where everything starts, because pressure at executive level is not just an external condition like market volatility or board tension. It becomes internal architectural stress. It starts reshaping attention, perception, relational behavior, even what a leader is willing to hear. What most people call leadership under pressure is actually structural compression. The leader is not just reacting, they're reorganizing in real time. And the question is not whether that happens, it does. So the question is what they reorganize into. There is a line I keep coming back to. Pressure is not a situation, it's a structural event. Most leadership frameworks still treat pressure like something you manage, like a fire drill. But at board level, it behaves more like gravity. It exposes what can hold and what cannot. So two founders can sit in the same board meeting. They get same feedback, same tone, same stakes. But one integrates it and expands strategy. The other experiences it as threat, starts defending authority, and unconsciously narrows the system. Nothing changed outside, but everything changed inside. Research from Harvard Business Review has shown that executive stress directly impacts decision quality and cognitive flexibility under uncertainty, particularly when pressure exceeds a leader's internal capacity to process complexity. And that's the real threshold, not intelligence, integration capacity. Because once pressure exceeds that capacity, something predictable happens. Truth stops moving upward. Dissent gets filtered. Strategy becomes simplified too early. And the organization starts optimizing for comfort inside leadership rather than accuracy about what's really going on. That's the quiet beginning of organizational decline, not failure. For years, the leadership world has leaned on two pillars, resilience and emotional intelligence, and both are very useful. But neither explains what I'm describing. Because you can be highly emotionally intelligent and still be operating from control. You can be resilient and simply be enduring a structure that is slowly eroding you. And resilience without architecture just means you can survive misalignment longer. It doesn't necessarily mean you're expanding, that your capacity is growing. And that's where a lot of senior leadership quietly gets stuck. They don't break down, they adapt. And adaptation under sustained pressure has cost. You see it in executive teams that stop speaking freely. In innovation that slows, but nobody can quite explain why. In leadership who are successful on paper, but increasingly detached from meaning. Even research from MIT Sloan Management Review has been moving toward a different conclusion. Long-term leadership effectiveness correlates more strongly with nervous system regulation, adaptability, and identity integration than with traditional performance metrics alone. So in other words, it's not just how you perform, it's what pressure turns you into while you perform. And that's the part most governance conversations miss. But the deeper governance question is internal. What governs the leader when pressure rises? Because under pressure, leadership patterns become very consistent. Some leaders tighten into control. Some leaders withdraw into the indecision. Some over-index on harmony and avoid hard calls. And some go mechanically productive while internally disconnected. These are not personality quirks, they are structural identity responses, and pressure reveals them fast. This is where a different lens becomes necessary, one that looks at leadership not as behavior, but as internal organization, internal structure, a structured way to understand how leaders hold attention, meaning, physiology, relationships, and direction when stakes rise. Because that is what determines whether they expand or fragment. You can see it across a few core dimensions. Cognitive clarity, for example, determines whether pressure sharpens perception or collapses it into threat. Physiological regulation determines whether urgency becomes presence or reactivity. Meaning also determines whether performance is still anchored in purpose or drifting into emptiness. Integrity determines whether decisions hold under scrutiny or shift with optics. And relational capacity determines whether truth can survive inside the room. And contribution, it determines whether the leader reproduces at scale intentionally or not. This is where things become very real, because organizations don't just scale strategy. They scale the internal state of leadership, of its leaders. If the leader fragments under pressure, the system learns fragmentation. If the leader stays coherent under pressure, the system learns coherence. And if everyone feels the difference, even if no one says it out loud. There's a line from Stephen Porges' work on polyvagal theory that lands here. Physiological state shapes perception. Meaning, before a leader even decides how to interpret pressure, their nervous system is already influencing what reality looks like to them. And that is not mindset. That is infrastructure internally. And infrastructure is what either holds complexity or distorts it. So the real question is not, can this leader handle pressure? The real question is, what does pressure turn this leader into? Because at executive level, pressure is not the test. It is the reveal. And increasingly, the difference between leaders who expand and leaders who contract is not experience or intelligence. It is whether their internal architecture can hold increasingly complexity without fragmentation, distortion. That is what determines whether authority becomes stabilizing or distorting inside an organization. And there is a final layer that often also gets overlooked. Leadership is not only what you achieve, it's what you can reproduce culturally, structurally, emotionally. So the question becomes, what does your leadership scale when you are under pressure? Does it scale clarity or does it scale confusion? Does it scale truth or does it scale more filtering? Expansion or contraction? Because whatever is unresolved internally does not stay internal. It also scales. And that is where the conversations in boardrooms is slowly shifting away from performance alone and toward infrastructure. What are we doing to help build the inner structure of our leaders? Toward identity underload, toward whether a leader can stay internally coherent when everything externally is increasing in complexity. Because the organizations that last are not necessarily led by the most charismatic or experienced CEOs. They are led by those who do not fragment when pressure increases. And that difference is no longer subtle. It is visible in real time.